Grammar and punctuation. Grammar. Grammar can be defined as the rules by which words are changed and ordered to form sentences. It sets out rules which should be followed if you wish to speak or write correct or good English. One of the basic requirements of academic writing is that it should be grammatically correct. Another fundamental requirement of academic writing is that you are familiar with and able to accurately use the appropriate academic vocabulary. Every subject has its own terminology, of course, but in addition, there is a more generic academic vocabulary that you should be familiar with. For example, knowing the difference between infer and imply, subjective and objective, quote and quotation, illicit and illicit, and etc. Why does grammar and punctuation matter? For one thing, assignment briefs, across all areas, will very often include accuracy of expression as one of the assessment criteria. That being the case, it would be foolish to lose marks and miss out on higher grades, simply because you haven't expressed yourself or proofread sufficiently carefully. Academic skills advisors will be able to help you to identify specific issues with your writing and to see any typical patterns of errors to watch out for. The important thing here is to understand not only what is wrong, but why it is wrong. The other crucial reason why they matter is that errors of grammar and punctuation can and do interfere with meaning, making it difficult, or at worst impossible, for the reader to understand what you want to say. Sometimes, it may just be a case of rejigging the word order to remove ambiguity. Like it or not, a very large part of the assessment on most courses is based on the quality and accuracy of your writing. If your writing is clear, unambiguous, and fluently expressed, it does make a huge difference. The reader is that much more likely to feel confident about what you are telling them. In most cases, clear writing equals to clear thinking. To put it the other way around, if the writing is confused, it gives the impression that the thinking behind it is too. Grammar and punctuation are closely connected, as we will see, because both have to do with the correct construction of sentences. Grammar advice. The first thing to say is that this will vary from person to person. Just as we all have different strengths, we all equally have different areas in which we need to improve. That's why it is important to be aware of and record your own particular pattern of errors. Grammar is a large subject, so the more specific you can be about any difficulties you have, the better. When you understand what you are doing wrong, and why, then you can begin to do something about it. In general terms, it is important to remember two things. 1. If you write long and complex sentences, you are more likely to make grammatical mistakes, particularly with verb tenses and singular and plural agreement. Unless, or until you are confident about your command of grammar, it is probably better to write in shorter sentences, of not more than 2 lines or so. There is no problem with this, it is good style actually. 2. Spoken language is generally informal. Academic language, on the other hand, is nearly always formal and impersonal. What this means is, if you write as you speak, you are probably going to be using the wrong style or register. The impersonal voice means that you generally need to avoid using the pronoun I, unless you are engaged in reflective writing, in which case you can't and shouldn't avoid it. This in turn means that you need to be able to construct passive sentences. For example, the underlying reasons will be identified and evaluated rather than I will identify and evaluate. Singular and plural errors. The correct use of singular and plural nouns and verbs is undoubtedly one of the most common areas of difficulty. There are 5 main problems to watch out for. Verbs should agree with nouns. If the subject of a sentence is singular, so should the verb be. If the subject is plural, the verb should be plural likewise. For example, these problems are not unusual. The situation is now resolved. Uncountable nouns usually have no final s and take a singular verb. For example, this information, advice, evidence, or research is useful. The water, atmosphere, or terrain is contaminated. Do not forget the s at the end of third person, singular present tense verbs. For example, the writer explains, describes, or discusses. The narrator states, implies, or emphasizes. If the subject is plural, you don't need the s. For example, the authors explain, describe, or discuss. Many commentators believe, consider, or dispute. Two linked nouns should agree. For example, both the similarities and the differences are relevant. The advantages and disadvantages of wind farms are under review. Be careful not to confuse the singular and plural forms of these common verbs. Has and have, is and are, do and does. Again, the rule to remember is that the verb must agree with the subject in terms of number. Look at the subject of the sentence, decide if it is singular or plural, and then choose the appropriate verb form. Some other grammar-related errors. 1. Incomplete sentences. Every sentence must have a subject. That is, who or what it is about, and at least one verb, and it must make complete sense on its own. If any of these ingredients are missing, it is not a proper sentence, so proofread carefully, sentence by sentence, with this in mind. 2. Overcomplicated sentences. It is all too common to come across sentences that are overly long and complex. The problem here is that the meaning just gets lost in the accumulation of information. The solution is simple: divide. Shorter sentences are clearer, more easily digestible, and can be more emphatic. 3. Incorrect use of verb tenses. For example, when you are citing authors or evidence that are still valid and current, the convention is to use the present tense. For example, Nugent identifies 4 key priorities. When you are referring to a past source that was important at the time, you can use the past simple. For example, Piaget identified 4 stages in child development. Missing off a past tense endings is another quite common error, as is confusing continuous verb forms with simple forms, such as live and living, or think and thinking. These kinds of mistakes may be related to your first language or dialect, and if so, you need to proofread. 4. Wrong or missing word endings. As well as the missing verb endings mentioned above, watch out for missing endings on other kinds of words as well, as in the following cases. ly endings for adverbs such as slow and slowly, or bad and badly, or gradual and gradually, or usual and usually. S or es or ies endings for plural nouns such as result and results, or inquire and inquiries, or box and boxes, or match and matches. er or est endings for adjectives such as close, closer, and closest, or few, fewer, and fewest, or easy, easier, and easiest. 5. Countable and uncountable noun. Use fewer or many for nouns that can be counted. For example, fewer people, fewer cars, fewer problems, many countries, or many items. Use less or much for nouns that cannot be counted. For example, less water, less pollution, less recognition, much opposition, or much controversy. Punctuations. Importance of punctuations. The purpose of all punctuation is to add clarity to your writing and to guide the reader through it. If it is missing or incorrectly used, the meaning will suffer. The following are some of the most common misunderstandings. Commas. One of the most widespread and serious punctuation errors is to use a comma when you actually need a full stop. This is sometimes known as the comma splice, and can lead to sentences that are much too long, as well as being grammatically incorrect. Look at this example. Information technology has revolutionized modern life. It would be difficult to think of a workplace in which it was not used. These are in fact two separate sentences, and cannot be separated by a comma. The rule of thumb here is, if it is possible to use a full stop, you shouldn't use a comma. In the above example, there are three possible ways of correcting the mistake. 1. Make two separate sentences. IT has revolutionized modern life. It would be difficult to think of a workplace in which it was not used. 2. Use a linking word or phrase to make one correct sentence. IT has revolutionized modern life, and it would be difficult to think of a workplace in which it was not used. 3. Link the two sentences with a semicolon. IT has revolutionized modern life. It would be difficult to think of a workplace in which it was not used. Of course, in order to decide whether something is a sentence or not, you have to be clear about what a sentence is. A sentence has to have a subject and a verb, and it has to make complete sense on its own. Jimmy lost his keys, for example, meets all three requirements. Subject, Jimmy. Verb, lost. Plus the statement is complete and meaningful. Do not be afraid of having short sentences occasionally. Variety is the key to good style, so you should aim to have a mixture of simple and more complex sentences. Colons and semicolons. Misuse, or confusion of these two, is another very common error. Colons are easy. Essentially, they are used to introduce something. Usually, a list. I wrote down everything I needed: nails, screws, glue, string, and wire. A quotation. Lady Macbeth replies, "Give me the daggers." An explanation of something already mentioned. There is one thing I will not tolerate: dishonesty. Semicolons sometimes cause confusion. They have two distinct uses. To link two complete sentences, where the second one continues a point made in the first, and where there is a strong connection between the two statements, each of which could be a sentence on its own. For example, chess is a game of skill. Patience is a game of chance. Between long phrases in a list, that is, where each item in the list is not just one word, but several. For example, the investigation revealed several key problems: serious air pollution, underfunding by central government, lack of public awareness, and the decline of local transport services. This example shows the difference between the colon, to introduce the list, and the semicolon. Again, as with sentence length, good style involves variety. Your writing should demonstrate your ability to use the whole range of punctuation. Apostrophes. Of the remaining punctuation marks, the apostrophe is probably the one most frequently misused. They should not be used indiscriminately, just because there is an S at the end of a word. There are rules. Apostrophes are used either to show possession, or to show omission or abbreviation. Possession, or belonging. The rule is that if the subject is singular, the apostrophe goes before the S. If the subject is plural, it goes after the S. So, for example, the student's notes were on the table, to mean one student. The student's notes were on the table, to mean two or more students. The tree's leaves, to mean one tree. The tree's leaves, to mean two or more trees. Omission, or abbreviation. The rule here is that the apostrophe shows that a letter or letters have been missed out, for the sake of abbreviation. For example, I've remembered. They're late, she's mad. It's raining, we couldn't, or he'll be sorry. Note. In academic writing, These contractions should be avoided. The convention is to write out the full version. Remember also that the possessive pronouns, such as hers, ours, yours, and theirs, never have an apostrophe. Make sure too that you know the difference between whose and whose. For example, who's going to make the dinner? That is, who is. Whose coat is this? Or, a man whose skill is legendary. That is, not who is, but showing belonging. At Talent and Skills Hub, you can be supported by our instructors, academic skills advisors, and mentors for academic writing skills. Book an appointment for one-to-one or group tutoring through our website, tshub.com.